Hello and welcome, internet friends. I hope you're all doing great. Today, my friend Alfred, hi Alfred,
Hi, how are you?
and me will be talking about reading habits. I hope, with this episode, I hope that you will get to read more and learn to read better, even. I know that sounds like a funny concept, but I hope you'll learn what I'm talking about later in the video. And also, I hope this is a good introduction to people that are thinking about starting to read, or people that have always hated reading and are looking for an easy way in, if that makes sense. Before we start, I want to give a quick shout out to Alfred. He used to be in my same we used to be at the same school. We used to go to the same school, sorry, and we've always shared like the same interest and stuff. Actually, I helped him record a short film a couple of months ago, well, before quarantine, so like 20 years ago.
Yeah, before the quarantine, yes.
And yeah, with all that said, now you know what you're getting into. Let's go. I am Ivan, and this is The Book Place. Okay, well, as you already heard, we're going to talk about reading habits, and to start this episode, I want to ask Alfred, what's his story with reading? How did you get into reading, Alfred?
So I think, and I was mentioning to you beforehand, that reading starts at a very young age for most proficient readers, right? I started very young. I think the start of my reading came about when I was very, very young, before I could even read myself. So I used to listen to a lot of stories, right? My mom used to read me a lot of short books. And then when I was 5 years old, I learned how to read. And by the time I was 7, I was reading short novels, right? And I started with Harry Potter because I was a huge film fan, a cinephile. I started watching the films and I loved the books. And I started reading by my own when I was 7 years old, and I read the whole thing, the whole 7 books. I fell in love with it, and that was 13 years ago.
No? Yeah, that's insane.
And I never stopped, right? And then I just started picking new books, and I think it's never left me, and I think it never will. So I think that's important, and we were talking about that, right? Starting young or building a habit. I think many people start, as you were mentioning, trying to read classics or trying to read big books, but it should start with our own interests, with the books that we want to read when we're very young. The stories that really catch our attention, right? And for me, it was Harry Potter when I was 7, and then progressively bigger books.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's quite interesting because I did read from a very young age, but I think that at 7 I was like, I've never even grabbed a book in my life. Maybe How to Sing the ABCs or something like that.
Right.
Now I have a question. Were you always like a constant reader, or did you like read one book and then you stopped reading for like 7 months and then got back into it?
Well, I think it's very interesting because I think young kids are very good readers. So when I was 7, when I was maybe 7 to when I was 10, I was a bookworm, as they call them, right?
Yeah.
So I used to read as soon as I woke up, and it was the last thing I did before I went to bed, right? I used to carry my books in the car, and I used to go to family meetings, and I took my books with me. So I did read a lot, and I did read every day, right? But afterwards, when I grew up a little, when I was in maybe 4th grade, 5th grade, I stopped reading as intensively as I did, right? And then I stopped reading for a couple of years, right? When I wasn't like constantly carrying my books around. And I think it was until recently, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that I picked up the habit, right? And then right now, I don't think I read as much as I used to. I do consider myself a constant reader, but not as much. And I think it's important as well to understand that it's a habit that you can leave aside for a while, and then you'll come back and you'll still be a reader. You can pick it up. You can read for a month and then leave your books aside and come back to them, right?
Yeah. And why do you think you stopped reading on that little period between now and then? What happened?
I think it's a matter of maybe social constructs and we're interested by other stuff in our teens, maybe. And nowadays, when I think about it, I actually regret leaving reading aside for some time, right? Maybe I was interested in other stuff, and I was hanging out with friends, and I was doing other interesting stuff. I fell in love with films, for example. I never left those. I think it's important, regardless of what your passions are, not to leave them aside, because among my group of friends, I used to be the only guy who read, right? And so sometimes when your friends are not doing the stuff that you like, you kind of leave it aside because no one else shares that with you, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so I think if I were to share a message with people who are starting to read or are starting in any sort of creative endeavors or hobbies, do the thing that you like, right? Do you? I do regret leaving reading aside, but it's important that when I realized that I loved it so much that I couldn't leave it aside, you go back to it, and eventually the things that you love will manifest themselves, right? It's impossible for you to toss them aside.
Yeah. Actually, it's quite funny that you mentioned all those things, because I remember that when I started reading, I was also quite young, and I started with books like my first books were The Diary of the Wimpy Kids, I think, and then I read Percy Jackson.
Okay.
And I absolutely loved reading, but I would always start a book. If I liked it in like the first 20 pages, I would finish it that day.
Right.
And then I would stop reading for like a month, and then if the next book I picked up didn't like instantly catch my attention in the first 30 pages, I would stop reading for like 6 months at least, or even a year. So I think it's important to understand that you should read what you like. If you're not enjoying a book, skip it. You don't need to finish it. You don't need to feel pressure to do so. And yeah, go ahead.
That's a very good point there, Ivan, because I think we force ourselves into reading sometimes. It should be a habit where you should be disciplined a little bit, but discipline shouldn't be hard, right? It shouldn't be something that you force upon yourself, right? Like I think a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with a friend from high school as well, and he told me, for my entire life, I'd never picked up a book. I had never read a book in my entire life, and the quarantine kind of forced me into it.
Okay.
And he read his first book, right? But it was a book that he chose, that it wasn't imposed, that he chose out of his own free will, and he liked it, right? And he told me, hey, I want to build this habit because I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the right approach, because sometimes I think many people are confused or they don't like reading because it's forced upon them, right? Because your school teacher says you should read this.
Yeah.
Or someone says you should read this, or you think, hey, I should read the classics, or I should read philosophy, or like classic French literature, whatever. That's not it. If it's not the thing that like burns inside you, that you want to pursue, it's not there, right? That's not the answer for you.
Yeah, and I think school is probably the most, like the thing that kills the most avid readers. It destroys them. Because they make you read very complicated, very old books or very heavy literature from a very young age, even if you are not interested in those things. And then they test you on that, and they force you not to enjoy it, but to remember the little facts about it. And I think that's terrible for readers. And going back to what you said earlier, I think maybe your friends doing it or not can also play an impact. And to be fair, my friends have always been readers, like not super constant, but if you mention a book to them, they probably have at least heard of it. Well, many people haven't, to be honest.
Yes.
And I think that has helped me a little bit on, becoming a constant reader. Although, when I started reading, and this is kind of a sad story, but I find it funny, I barely had any friends. Like,
okay.
on elementary school, I remember, like, until 4th grade, I didn't have a single friend. So what I would do is I would go to the library the whole day, and my best friend was the librarian, right? And
right.
I remember that at the end of the year, I got an award for spending the most time on the library.
Wow. No, and I think what you mentioned is crucial, because it talks about our relationship with books, right? Especially when we're young and we feel isolated or alone, or we don't feel connected with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
We don't relate with others as much, right? But books are always there. For me, that was crucial, right? As I mentioned, I was so captured by these books. I remember I used to, I woke up with my books. I was with them all the time. For me, it was impossible not to be with them. And I think that plays, at the end of the day, a big role in making me who I am today. And in my developing years, right, when I was growing up, those were huge for me, right? Maybe it's not literature for everyone, right? Everyone will have their own supports and their own aids in growing. But when you find it, that's vital.
Yeah.
For me, it was the biggest thing.
And one thing that might play a big factor, a big role into it, now that I think about it, the kids of today, if they are feeling bored or alone, they can just tune in Netflix. Netflix didn't exist when we were, 10 years old, 7 years old. So the best thing to do was either watch, Cartoon Network or pick up a book.
Yeah, actually, I remember when I was young, my mom didn't let me watch TV early in the morning, right? Because not at 7 a.m. when I woke up.
Yeah.
So if I didn't want to be bored for the whole weekend, at least in the morning, I had to pick up a book, right?
That's actually a really good idea. I'm going to do that to my children.
Yes, it builds the habit. And now that you mentioned the electronic side of things, I think that's important. Where we're heading today, because I think it's harder for people to pick up the habit today than it was when we were kids. And it plays with the fact that we have so many options, right? That maybe sometimes we do have to narrow down. Because if you can stream movies and go on social media or do whatever, it's going to be harder for you to pick up the habit, because it does take time, and it does need you to sit down and spend maybe half an hour, maybe an hour with a book, right? If you're dispersed, if you don't pay that attention,
you need to force yourself. Is that what you're? Yeah.
Well, you need to commit yourself.
Yeah. I think I agree, especially because, like for us, we started reading at a really young age. So even if we stopped for a while, we were we were obviously going to come back. But for someone that has never picked up a book, they have so many distractions that unless they actively want to read, I think it will be very hard for them to stumble into reading, accidentally, like it is our case, kind of.
No, it's not going to happen by accident, by any chance. Something you need to actually pursue yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Now, how much do you read nowadays? Like, do you read every night? What do you like to read?
Well, I think my reading habits are a bit dispersed. I don't read, I don't have a specific hour for reading, which I think I want to. I'm trying to wake up early in the mornings and have that as my reading time, right? And sometimes I do read before going to bed. I read about, say, a book every 2 weeks, maybe. I try to read a book a week. And so I do think I am a constant reader, but I don't read as much as I'd want to, right? I think when you start reading and you know how much you can read, you start realizing you're not reading as much as you could. But I do enjoy my books, and I tried, I started on this Goodreads trends and setting goals for the year and whatnot.
Yeah.
And recently I've realized I'm not enjoying that approach as much when we try to look at our reading habits numerically or like with numbers. Mm-hmm. It does work, and it does motivate me a lot to know how many books I've read. But I've realized recently I enjoy taking things slow more. Yeah, so and I enjoy sitting with my books and
taking so time.
I used to think, hey, if I read a book a week, I'll read 52 books a year, and then that will exponentially grow, and then I'll be the smartest kid around.
Yeah.
And I do set my goal for the year every year on Goodreads for the past maybe 4 years to read 52 books. And I think on average I read 30 books a year.
Okay.
30, 33. And I know maybe I won't reach the 52 anytime soon. It does push you. I think it's good to set a goal.
Yeah.
But especially for people who are starting, I'd say don't think about it as much, right? Just read the book that's in front of you and commit to it.
Enjoy it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing is not commitment, but enjoyment. Like, if you're not enjoying, it's going to be really hard to commit. So you'd rather skip that book, get one that you enjoy, and then be committed to finishing that one. And
Yes.
when you mentioned that you were now taking things slow, that really resonated with me, because I personally started reading, like constantly, like a couple of months before quarantine this year. And I was reading pretty, like, at my own pace, but once quarantine started, I was like, oh my god, I can read like 30 books this year if I want to. So I picked up this huge series. It's called the Stormlight Archives, and it has 4 books so far. They will be 10, and each book is 1,000 pages long, right?
Wow.
Yeah, so it's huge, right? It's big. And I read the first book slowly at my own pace in like 14 days or 20 days, like a pretty good pace for a 1,000 page long book. But then the second book, like, I was so eager to finish the series that I read the second book at a super fast speed. I finished it in like less than a week.
Wow.
Yeah, and although it was kind of cool that I finished it quickly, after finishing it and starting the third one, I realized that I enjoyed it so much more when I took it slow. So much more.
Yeah, definitely. I have an example in my own reading there as well. I think that the books that I've reread the most in my life are the Harry Potter books, because those I've reread since I was 7.
Yeah.
And one of the last times I read them, when I was maybe 14 or 15, I remember I was grounded during a summer holiday. So I couldn't do anything for the whole day. And I read the entire thing, the whole 7 books in a week.
Oh,
And-
wow. Oh, man.
and that's, I enjoyed it because I was in that fantasy world for the whole day.
Yeah.
But you do get more out of it when you read slow. And recently I found out when I was reading, I started picking up on this classic literature that I'm enjoying, and I read The Count of Monte Cristo by Dumas.
Yeah.
Haven't finished it. It's a very big book, very big, and I'm halfway there. But I left it aside maybe 6 months ago, and I haven't gone back to it. It's my goal to finish it this year. But
Yeah.
When you try to force it upon yourself, that's a book that I love and I am enjoying it so much, but it can be tough. So especially when you try to digest it in one sitting. So definitely take things slow there.
Yeah. So, like, it's a book where you need to be in the mood to enjoy it?
Yes, but especially that particular example with literature of the 18th and 19th century, they used to print them by series. So they would publish a little piece of the book every day in the newspapers.
Okay.
And I think The Count of Monte Cristo took maybe 2 years
Oh,
of
wow.
reading like a little piece every day.
Yeah.
But that's the way they're meant to be read, and they have so many plot points, and because it's the serial thing, right? It's not meant
Yeah.
to be read in one sitting. So maybe that takes into account the way the author meant the book to be read as well. I think people who write long books don't intend you to read them in one sitting, because it took ages for them to write.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and actually that's a really good point, and it, leads my way into what I wanted to talk about next. And that's about understanding that different books need different approaches.
Definitely.
Like, you shouldn't read a literature book or a non-fiction book the same way that you are going to read an entertainment fiction.
I completely agree. And I think it's a trend nowadays. It's very popular to take a look at those the courses for speed reading or master reading fast and read a book in a day, or this apps that say read a book in 15 minutes. And that's not the point. But I also don't discredit them entirely, because if you're reading a paper for college or for your homework, you're writing an essay, you need to read a thesis or whatever, you do need to be fast. If you're studying for an exam, you do need to be fast sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but that's the difference between reading for information and reading for enjoyment.
Exactly.
Like, I think non-fiction books are best to be read in the morning when you're fresh, with a notebook beside you to be taking notes. And then there's two things you can do. A, if it's just like you want to get into the topic and it's a very general book, you can read all the book, maybe skim through the parts that you don't find interesting. And if you're going for like a specific thing, it's okay to just, pick the segment or two that are talking about what you're trying to learn. You don't need to read the whole book if you just want some specific, bites of knowledge.
Exactly. Yes, and I think because I think we're going to try to teach some of the habits that work and some of the techniques that work for improving your reading and being more efficient with the time that you're committing to the habit, right? Yeah. And the conclusion I've reached after, looking at all these tips that they give you for being a better reader, right? Carrying a book with you all the time so you can read, or like waking up early in the morning, setting a specific hour.
Yeah.
And I think those are not wrong. They're not intended with bad purposes. But I think at the end of the day, it's every single person's individual responsibility to make their own habits. And the reason I say that is what works for me is not necessarily going to work for you, right?
Yeah,
I can read at specific hours. I can read maybe 50, 60, 100 pages a day, or I can read less, right? Maybe you take it slow. Maybe you read 1 page a day or 1 chapter a day. And you'll find your own habits. I think the best way to find those is to just actively dive into the habit, and you'll find what works for you.
Yeah, I agree completely. Actually, I remember that I heard that tip. Well, that thing that you just said of having always having a book with you. So I think that's generally, for most people, I think that's a bad advice, because I feel like if you're reading fiction, you need like 10 minutes to relax. And then after those 10 minutes, you can like get it immersed into the story. If you're like waiting for the bus and you take it out, you're not going to enjoy in those like 5 minutes you have. However, on the other hand, I do enjoy reading like that. I do enjoy reading in the bus, and that works for me. Yes. But I don't think it's a good tip for like the general audience, or like for starting or for like beginning to get into reading. I think it's better to experiment once you like it and see what works.
Exactly. Afterwards. I think the best way to look at it is reading is not a chore. It's pleasure, and look at it as an art. I'd say the best metaphor would be to look at it as the way you eat, right? You can eat in a rush, you can eat in a hurry. It serves a purpose. You need to.
Yeah.
But you also enjoy eating, right? And you enjoy it more when you take the time to do it, when you take the time to cook, if you take the time to set the table, if you take the time, to build that space and build that time, and you enjoy it, right? In the same way that you enjoy going out with a friend for a meal, or you enjoy sitting around with your family, right?
Yeah.
You build time and you build a space for it. You don't just go at it and take all the food in at once.
Yeah, exactly.
So in the same way that you can eat in a rush, and you can eat and take your time for that, reading requires that, right? Don't look at it as a box that you need to check or a box you need to tick.
Yeah,
right?
it's not a race. It's not a race. Yeah.
It's self-care.
Yeah, exactly. I really like that example with the food, by the way. I think one important thing to take into consideration is that you need to understand, like, you like literature, right? And non-fiction.
Yes.
So, while you might not have a goal for amount of books read, I mean, you told me you do have, but you don't focus too much on that. You do have a goal on what you want to achieve from reading.
Definitely, yes.
And I think it's important for everybody to set that goal.
Because at the end of the day, you do want to take something from your reading. It's enjoyment, but at the same time, it's something that's nurturing you, and you get something from what you read, right? It does build you up.
Yeah.
So I think a good example of that is when I started, getting back to the habit, I was reading a lot of nonfiction books, particularly on Buddhism, because I was very interested in the topic, and I read a lot of Buddhist books.
Yeah.
And these Eastern philosophies and whatnot, and I had that goal in mind. I wanted to learn about something, right? It was not pure enjoyment. And I think at the end of the day, you can, that with knowledge, that's a particular thing that you can go back to, and you can look back and say, I've learned this much, right? And it's built me up as a person, and it's left something in me, right? And in a slightly similar way, it's alike with literature, right? At the end of the day, it's going to leave something with you in conversation or in thoughts, or if, like me, you're someone who creates and you're writing or you're making films or whatnot, you get all of those ideas are part of your collective imaginary source of inspirations that you carry around, right? So as a person, it does build you up. And maybe you think, hey, I want to read the classics, or I want to read some French literature or young adult fiction or whatnot. I'm very interested in this author, for example. And you'll get something. It will shift the way that you look at things. It will shift the way that you interact with other people, interact with yourself, with reality as a whole. It's amazing. It will leave something with you. And I think that should be your goal. Hey, I want to learn about life in the 18th century in France, maybe, or I want to learn about this particular set of values that this character has and will impart to me directly or indirectly.
Okay. Well, I kind of disagree with that. So it's funny. I think literature, right? I think it's specifically made to make people think.
Yes.
And to make people, get something. For example, did you read Brave New World?
Yes, a while ago, yeah, Huxley.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was a fantastic, thought-creating book. It was amazing, and it made me question everything. But on the other hand, when I'm reading something like, The Lost Symbol or the Da Vinci Code, I just want to be entertained. I just want to have a good time, which is also important.
Yes. Not all books are going to leave you with a new set of ideas or with a new perspective or questioning reality or questioning the government.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, but they will all leave something. For example, when I was reading Dumas, when I read the Three Musketeers, you might think, hey, what's this going to teach me about life in the 21st century when I'm reading about the Musketeers of the King in the 18th, 16th century? But they carry a set of values, they carry a set of ideals. They at the end of the day, characters leave something behind. I think even if you read the Da Vinci Code, if you read out about adventure, there's something that's going to stick there. Even if you're just entertained, at the end of the day, in your own head, you're going to have these ideas and this things that you can look back and reference in your own work, in your own creative pursuits.
Well, yeah, I can actually see that. Like, I think especially with, when you're reading about interesting situations or interesting characters, you can learn you can learn interesting things, but B, you can also learn how to empathize or about thinking how you would deal with these situations or these characters, and I think that's good too.
Yes, it puts us in other perspectives and makes us leave other lives.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, and maybe pushing forward to the habits, I do think reading makes us richer as a whole. It makes us fuller and it makes us grow. I think it does make a huge difference. If you take a look at the person you were a year ago before the 30 books you read this year, those change and those will help you, those will grow with you, right? In the same way that when we were kids, we used to spend all day with a book in our hands, and those helped us grow. In the same fashion, the books that you read today will build you into who you are, because maybe you think a book is not going to leave something concise or concrete in you.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a specific thing that you learn. Now I learned it. But with the passing of time, every single book that you read and every single story and every single film and every single song, those build up, and those are a huge part of your identity, I dare to say. So I do think for people who haven't given the chance to the habit or who are struggling with it, I'd say I'd encourage you, because it's not only gonna entertain you, it's also gonna build you, and you're gonna carry it forever. I think it makes the whole difference, a huge difference. There's a world between the people who read at least a book a year, and the people who don't. The people who read 30 books a year, they're far ahead.
And I think that's mainly because of two reasons. So on one hand, if you're reading, literature or nonfiction, you can, learn, like literally learn how to be a better person more explicitly, or with literature more implicitly, but that's kind of the goal of it anyways. However, with nonfiction, like even if you're reading nonfiction, you're learning how to be constant, how to run a habit, and one that can be, fairly hard. And I think that's equally important and can be equally benefiting to yourself as a person. Yeah. One rule I have, when reading, and I think this is going back to the reading tips, but whatever. And it's something that really helps me read more. And what I do is every time, I like to run schedules, right? However, I don't like to force myself into those schedules. Like if it's, do this tedious thing from this hour to this hour, I'm not going to do it. But something that we always have to do, no matter the day, is go to sleep, go to your bed. And every time that people go to bed, they take out their phone and they use, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Netflix, whatever. My rule is no phones in the bed.
That's fantastic.
I've read so much thanks to that, man.
Yes, that's fantastic. Because what you said, I love what you said. You always go to bed, so that's going to force you to be constant, right?
Yeah.
There's not a single day that you don't do it. And that's fantastic because you're building the environment that you need to cultivate the habit. It's interesting now that you mentioned schedules, because I also like to schedule my day a lot, but I don't like, forcing myself to stick to, you got to do this at this hour, and right? I don't like very strict schedules.
Yeah.
But what it started me thinking about is when I think about my schedule for the day, I do think about how I'm investing my time, right? So you got a certain amount of hours a day that you got to invest into something. And I was telling you privately before we were recording about what I think about our efficiency and our usage of time, right? And I think when I looked at my metrics on my phone and I spend 2 hours a day on Instagram, and I realized, hey, how long am I reading for? Or how long am I building other productive habits for during the day? And I'm just tossing away time that isn't necessarily productive on other habits, right? It starts you thinking. I think a lot of us are very good at setting excuses, making up excuses for why we don't do things. And eventually they'll all boil down to time. We don't have enough time to do things. But as you said, it's a matter of building a space and building the time and constructing that scenario where you will construct the habit and it will be pleasurable and natural for you.
Yeah, exactly. It will be something you love. And it's funny because exactly, we love to make excuses. We say we don't have time, yet we spend 4 hours per day in the phone.
Yes.
And I think that's really funny. Like there's this quote from Fahrenheit 451. I don't remember it exactly, but it went something along the lines of, we have a lot of free time. No, we have a lot of, non-working time, but we never have time to think.
Yes. That's crazy, no?
Yeah, it's insane. And I find it fascinating. Like that book was written, before phones were a thing. But nowadays, it's more real than ever, and I think it's a bigger issue than it has ever been.
I think we shouldn't, be foes, be enemies with technology, because it's brought us a lot of great things.
Yeah.
But we should be careful of how we deal with it, how we interact with it. I think I was starting to feel very anxious about it. I was starting to feel, like I was available all the time and I was doing something all the time, and anyone could call me, anyone could message me. And I think we should set times for those things. I think we should set an hour a day where we're not concerned about what's happening everywhere in the web.
Yeah.
And we should focus on where we're at the moment, what we're doing right now. And, pick up that book. Whenever I read, and that is part of my habit, I put my phone in do not disturb, because I do not want to be disturbed, right?
Yeah.
Because if my phone's ringing, I'm very easily distracted by it.
Yeah.
Right. And the slightest thing, the silliest message will distract me.
And then it takes 30 more minutes till you can return.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree completely. Well, I think we're nearing like 40 minutes, I think. Do you want to wrap it up? Say your final thoughts?
Oh, my final thoughts. I'd say reading it's been with us, the use of language and the written language. It's been with us forever, practically, as a civilization, as a human species. And it's brought us amazing things. And I think it'd be a pity if we lost the habit. And I'd say to all of those out there to all of you who are not pursuing the habit directly, go for it. It'll leave amazing marks on you for life.
Yeah, I agree completely with Alfred. And remember, it's something you need to enjoy, but it's also something you do need to put time into. And after you read your first 5 books, even if you have to kind of force yourself into reading them, it will stick for you with your whole life, and you'll be so happy you found that habit. You'll be so glad that you will never want to come back to how you were before.
Exactly.
Yeah, just some final points before we end. I want to say that I think it's important that you schedule things or have like an idea of when you're going to read, and also make sure to understand how you're reading in relationship to what you're reading. With all that said, Alfred, thank you very much for doing this with me. I hope you had fun.
It was a pleasure.
Awesome. And yeah, that's it. See ya, guys. Take care.